Hello again. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy. This is episode 333, Introduction to VMware ESXi Virtualization. So in this class today, I'm going to show you how to set up a Type 1 hypervisor using VMware ESXi, and I will show you how to install a virtual server onto that Type 1 hypervisor. So when we're talking about Type 1 hypervisors, we're talking about bare metal hypervisors for virtualization. This means we install the hypervisor directly onto the bare metal, directly onto the computer, and then we install the instances of the operating system on top of that. So basically, this is the way that you will be virtualizing for server infrastructure. So when you use Type 1 hypervisors, you're virtualizing servers. So you're virtualizing LAMP servers, web servers, Exchange servers, Active Directory servers, FTP servers. This is virtualization for servers. Now there's a lot of different software you can use for virtualization. As I talked about in the introduction to Type 1 hypervisors in episode 328, there's a lot of different software out there, and most of it is based off of the Xen hypervisor software that was created a long time ago, and it's open source, it's free, so on and so forth. The reason that I'm starting off with showing you guys how to do Type 1 virtualization with VMware ESXi is because I think it's the best for you guys to start out with for a couple of reasons. Now the first reason is originally I was going to show you how to do this with Citrix. So Citrix has Xen Server, which is a free piece of software you can use. The issue there was you had to create special storage in order to store the virtual servers before you actually got into the virtualization. Again, I am trying to keep this simple for you guys so that you don't get confused. So the first reason that I went with ESXi is I think it is simpler to teach you and to learn on than other options out there. The other reason that I went with VMware ESXi, or I was going to go with Citrix instead of a completely open source free version, is again, as a professional, I like using free software that I can purchase an improved service on later. So if you went with a completely free open source hypervisor, there is the possibility that as your business grows, you may not be able to get the support that you need in the future. The nice thing with VMware ESXi is when you start out, it is completely 100% for free, both for home, lab, and commercial use, so you can use this in a real commercial environment. But you know, a year down the road, 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, as your infrastructure gets bigger and bigger and bigger and you have less time to deal with it, you can very easily throw VMware $3,000 extra and basically they can handle a lot of the issues. So if you have support problems, they give you help with the support. If you need additional functionality, again, you send them a $1,000 check and you get that additional functionality. You go with some of the other open source options out there, and the issue is if you run into a problem, you know, what do you do about it? Again, I'm trying to teach you guys how to be professionals, and this is one of the things you have to think about. It's not just the current cost of the product, but it's a total cost of ownership. What is the cost of this product going to be over the entire expected lifespan? And again, once you start deploying Active Directory servers and web servers and all kinds of production servers into this virtualized environment, if something happens, you are going to need support, you're going to need help. So I decided to show you guys VMware ESXi today because I think it's one of the simpler options for you guys to learn. It is free to use, either commercial, lab, home, whatever, and because as you grow, if you need support in the future, you'll be able to get it. So before I go into showing you how to actually set all this up, let's go over the whiteboard just to make sure you guys understand some of the basic concepts that we're dealing with. Again, with computers, with networking, with servers, the whole 9 yards, if you don't understand the basic concepts, then you're going to get very confused. You're not going to be able to know what's going on, and then it's all going to turn into a mess. So the main thing to understand is what we are going to be building is this Type 1 hypervisor server And this will be using something called ESXi. So it's VMware ESXi, and we will be installing ESXi onto the server, onto the hardware. Now the ESXi we're using today, I think is 5.1. I have been playing with ESXi for years, about 3 or 4 years, and I can tell you it has basically stayed the same. So even if you're watching this class in a year or two, basically what I'm showing you today should be what you'll use in a year or two. ESXi, although they have added additional functionality, it still looks the same. It's a little bit different. But basically, so we install ESXi onto the hardware, and then what we do is we install instances of the servers onto the ESXi. So then once we install ESXi on the hardware, then we install Ubuntu or Windows 2008 or LAMP or whatever else into instances on the server. Now the important thing to remember is that this ESXi virtualization hypervisor is a server just like the Ubuntu server is a server and just like the 2008 server is a server. So this box itself will get its own IP address. So today it's 192.168.1.3. So this box itself has its own IP address. Then the Ubuntu server and the 2008 server and the LAMP server, they also will have their own IP addresses. So the one I have set up in the box now is 192.168.1.6. So this is very important to remember, is that this hypervisor has its own IP address and has its own configurations. Just remember that. It's one of those things that can be a little confusing. Now with this, again, when we're using type 1 hypervisors, we are going to be building virtualized servers. These are not generally desktop computers, these are servers. And the reason is because it's easier to be able to deal with. So basically, if we want to create a LAMP server, which is a web server, that means all these computers all over the internet would get pointed to this one LAMP server. So when we're dealing with individual clients, they will all get pointed to the server that they're supposed to interact with. So if you have a 2008 Active Directory server, all the Active Directory clients will get pointed at that instance of the server. If you're trying to get to a web server, all the clients will get pointed to that instance of the web server, so on and so forth. Now, when you're dealing with the hypervisor, though, the actual hypervisor itself, what is important to understand is when you sit down at this hypervisor, when you sit down and you look at the screen, you got a keyboard and all that, there's not a whole lot to see. Basically, you're going to look at something that looks a lot like a DOS prompt or a Linux prompt. It's really horrible. Like, you don't get very much information. What you need is you need a management computer somewhere else that will connect to that hypervisor so that you will be able to manage it. So that's what I'll be showing you also today is the type 1 hypervisor, and then we'll be sitting with something called a vSphere client sitting at my computer, and that is how we will configure and how we will play with this hypervisor. So this is all very important. Remember, the hypervisor has its own IP address. Each individual server has their IP addresses. This is done through something called NAT, Network Address Translation. Again, don't forget that. And then as these computers, the client computers will be connecting to the individual servers, the individual instances, but when you configure the hypervisor, you will be using the management server, a management computer, to go and configure it. So with that, let's go back to my computer just so I can show you how you can download this yourself. Again, ESXi is free, and the management software is free. Something called vSphere is free. The important thing to remember when you download the vSphere, though, is ESXi is free, but when you download vSphere, the first version you're going to download, it's going to be a 60-day trial. That 60-day trial is going to give you all the functionality, all the bells and whistles that vSphere can offer for like the $3,000 version, right? All those bells and whistles are very cool, but you would have to pay for them. This allows you to do something called live motion, where you can, in a live systems, move instances of operating systems around between different pieces of hardware, or live like data redundancy, where if one server fails, it will automatically move an instance to another server. So that is all through the paid-for version. If you want to use the free version, you will just download the vSphere, but just realize when that 60-day trial ends, all of those advanced functions will stop. So basically when the 60-day trial ends, all you'll be able to do is very simply manage each individual instance of the servers, and you will have basic functionality. But for most of you, that's more than good enough. This is just something to keep in your head. So if you want to go and you want to download ESXi, literally all you can do is you can go to Google and you type in free ESXi and you hit enter. When you hit enter, the first thing that should pop up, it says free VMware vSphere Hypervisor, blah, blah, blah. You click on that link, and then you're looking at a standard web page. Here, let me expand this a little bit. And it gives you all the, facts and support and all that. But the main thing you want to go to is on the left-hand side, there's the download link. So you just click on the download link. Oops, back. Okay, so you click on the download link. I was having a little problem there. And then this is where you'll be able to download. Basically, the license and download. You have to log in, or you can create an account. So I have an account with these guys. You don't have to pay anything for this. You just get a free account like you would from any other service. And from here, it will then send you to the screen where you can download the ESXi that you want. So basically, this version now is 5.1. All you would do is you do the start download, and it will download the ISO file. In the future, if you need your license key is also here. So that's all you have to do in order to download ESXi. Just do a Google search for free ESXi, click on the link, go to download, create your account, and download it. You will then download an ISO file. All you have to do is burn that ISO file to a CD or DVD, and then you can take that and you can go and you can install it on your computer. Now, when you're going to install it on a computer, you will hear most people talk about you need special hardware in order to install a Type 1 hypervisor. You have to have a CPU that is capable of virtualization. Well, most computers that have been built over the last few years are capable of this. So if all you are doing is playing around, the easiest way to figure out if your computer is capable of running ESXi is literally to install it. If you install it and it works, then you know it works. If you try to install it and it doesn't work, then you need to get another computer. If you're going to put this into a truly production environment, like thousands of people are going to be hammering the system, then you should go. VMware has a hardware compatibility list, and you should check that out. If you are like me, you're just trying to create a server in your basement to play around with, to test functions, then again, all you have to do is put the CD in the computer, see if it runs. If it runs, you're good. If it doesn't run, then you need to know to go get a different computer. To show you, really seriously, how this works, I have got my trusty little gateway here that I talk about. So this is one of my gateway laptops that I have. I have like 5 or 6 of these. I bought them a few years ago for $400 a piece. They weren't that expensive 4 years ago, and they're probably less expensive now, but they are powerful enough to run ESXi. So again, if you're going to be doing this Type 1 hypervisors, don't feel like you have to go out and spend $2,000 or $3,000 on a server, especially if you're just playing around. These little gateway systems, they have dual-core processors, they've got 4 gigs of RAM, they have virtualization enabled, and therefore they work fine. So this is my Type 1 hypervisor, and I have already installed ESXi on it. Now, the reason I didn't show you the whole process is because it's really simple, guys. It's really simple. If you're at this point and being a tech professional, I shouldn't have to show you how to install ESXi. You take the CD, you put it in, you boot off the CD, you hit next, 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 you type in a username, you type in a password, and that's it. There's really not a lot to installing ESXi, but it is a little bit time consuming. Now, once you've installed ESXi, what I want to show you, though, is that this is all you get. So a lot of you guys are not going to know what to do with this. I know, because I didn't know what to do with this. Basically, once you install ESXi and you think you have this really cool hypervisor, all you get is a little bit of information, but the most important thing is the IP address down here. So, from this interface with a Type 1 hypervisor, there's not a whole hell of a lot you can do. The only things you can do are very simple things. So let me go in, F2, can put in a username and password to get into the more complicated administration stuff. Hit F2 again. And see, from here, the only things I can do on this server, this hypervisor, is I can configure my password, but the more important things is this network configuration. So right here, these are the settings where you can change whether this is DHCP, whether this is static IP address, so on and so forth. But that's really all you can do. Really, the only thing you can do on this box itself is you can change a password and you can change the IP configurations. That is it. Everything else has to be done on the management software, which will connect to this and configure everything. So that's the important thing to remember. So when you go to install it, again, you just take the CD, put it in, you install it, no big deal. When you go to configure it, you can change your password here, you can change the IP address here, but that's it. Everything else has to be done at the management server. So we come back to my desktop here. And so from this computer, this is where we will manage the hypervisor over there. So we have to install, or I already installed, something called vSphere. vSphere is the management software that allows me to connect to ESXi. So if you've already installed ESXi and you're thinking, Eli, where am I going to get vSphere from? Well, all you do is you actually can go to the IP address of the hypervisor. So 192.168.1.3. That is the IP address of the hypervisor over there. When I hit enter, I get this proceed anyway. And then from here, this is the server itself. This is the hypervisor server itself. And from here you can see that there's a link to download vSphere client. So if you don't have vSphere client already installed on your Windows computer, this is where you click and you can download the vSphere client. Again, I've been getting some arguments, some discussions about what kind of computers do real professionals use. I say Windows because the vSphere client works on Windows by default. They may have other options for Linux and Mac, but basically the standard vSphere works on Windows. So if you want your easiest time, all you do is you download it and install it onto a Windows computer. Now, once it's installed, as with everything in Windows, you'll get this nice little link. And this is the link you will use to connect to the hypervisor. So this opens up vSphere. Then in here, we do the IP address of the hypervisor and the username and password we created on the hypervisor when we set it up. And then we hit login, we get a certificate warning, and we hit ignore. And now it's loading. It gives me a little evaluation thing, I hit OK. But so now we are sitting and now we are looking at the management of the hypervisor. So we're not looking at the servers yet, we are looking at the hypervisor itself. So from here we got all these tabs and we can look at different information. So I can click on the summary, and from on here I can see what kind of hardware this particular server has, so I know what I'm dealing with. So I can see that it has 2 CPUs at 2.1 gigahertz, so I know it's an adequate processor, not great. We talked about in the other class about sockets, so it shows me it's 1 socket, shows me it's 2 cores per socket. Over here it shows me the total capacity of RAM, and it also shows me the total size of the hard drive. So this is giving me all the information about this particular hypervisor server. Then we can go and we can look at the virtual machines. So this is a virtual machine that I already built on the server that I'll show you in a minute. This can show you that I provisioned 17 gigs of hard drive space for this particular server. I called it Ubuntu. It shows you the current amount of CPU that it's using, the current amount of memory, so on and so forth. From there, we can go over, we can take a look at things like resource allocation. We can look at performance for the entire box. So if we were using Task Manager or Top on an individual instance of a server on the hypervisor, we would only see the information for that server. This is a way, by looking at the resources, we can see the resource allocation for the entire box. So we can see how the entire server is doing. We can see some stuff about configurations, local users and groups, events, so we can see what's going on with the server itself, and then permissions. A lot of this stuff here, we'll probably have an episode in the future to explain it more, but to keep it simple, this is the basic idea. So that shows you all of the information about the hypervisor itself. Now what we can do to look at the instances of servers on the hypervisor, we just click on the little plus that's right beside the 192.168.1.3. So I've already created one instance of a server. I will show you how to create another instance of a server, but just to make sure you guys understand what's going on, I've already created an instance of a server. So I have a server on here called Ubuntu. Now the important things with this, the server Ubuntu, is basically the question that I get from a lot of people is, well, how do you turn on a server and how do you turn off a server? Well, what you do, essentially, to turn on or turn off or to pause an instance of a server is you use these buttons up here. So you highlight the server that you're dealing with, and then if you want to quote-unquote turn it on, you hit the plus. If you want to turn it off, or you hit the green arrow. If you want to turn it off, you hit the red stop. And if you want to pause it, you hit the pause button. So these buttons here are what you use to turn on, turn off, or pause an individual instance of a server. Then, basically, again, we can go to things like summary. So with this, it gives me summary of the individual instance of this server. So I can see how much memory I gave this instance. So I gave it about 1 gig of RAM. It tells me what the current memory overhead is. And it gives me other information over here. So this tells me about the individual instance of this server. And then resource allocation, other stuff, performance, events. But the big thing that you're going to be dealing with is the console. So the console, this is how you interact with the instance of the server. So I installed basically Ubuntu 10.10 because it was the only version of Linux I had laying around. So I already installed that software, that operating system, Linux 10.10, within the instance sitting on that hypervisor, and now I can go into the console and control it. So from here, I simply type in my username and password, and you can see I have a full-fledged server going. It's trying to tell me to update it, of course. And so this is the Ubuntu software that's running on that instance. So I can go up here, I can look at accessories, I can look at games, graphics, so on and so forth. The main thing I want you guys to realize, though, is that you should be using a Type 1 hypervisor as a server, not as a desktop operating system. So on this particular server, I already installed Apache 2 to show you that it can run as a web server. So what I can do is I can just hit this button, go to accessories, and go down to terminal. From here, I can type in ifconfig, and this will give me the IP address of this instance, of this server. So if we're looking at this, we can see that the IP address is 192.168.1.6. So what I can do with that is, on my computer, I can go to 192.168.1.6, and now I am seeing the results of the default page for when Apache 2 is installed onto a web server. So this is the website that is being presented by 192.168.1.6. So just realize that, again, make sure when you're installing systems, instances onto these Type 1 hypervisors, you install servers. So web servers, FTP servers, SharePoint servers, Exchange servers, so on and so forth. Basically, the clients should be connecting to get a service from the servers. You should not be interacting with the system as if it's a normal desktop. But that's the basic overview of how this works with VMware ESXi. So if we go back, I can now show you how to create a new server. So what I'll do is I can just click the stop button, and this will actually stop that instance. And so that is as if I'm shutting off that instance. Now what I can do is I can highlight the hypervisor 192.168.1.3. I can right click on it and I can do new virtual machine. Now from here, I can create the environment for the virtual machine. This is where I'll select how much RAM it gets to use, how much hard drive space it gets to use, so on and so forth. I can either use a typical configuration or I can do a custom configuration. Since you guys should be learning how this works, we'll do a custom configuration. So what I can do is I click next and it says, what should this instance's name be called? So I call it test. Then I hit next. And then it asks where the data store I should use in order to get hard drive space for this hypervisor. So the data store may be located on the physical hypervisor, the physical server, or it may be located on a SAN or NAS device somewhere else. So just keep that in mind. With this particular hypervisor though, it's right there on the server itself. Again, that's why I like using ESXi. I click next. It asks you what virtual machine version you want to run. Again, depending on what you're doing, you may have a reason to change this. I would say use the most current version. Then you click next. Then it asks you what kind of operating system you're going to be putting on here. So it will try to optimize for the type of operating system. So if you're going to put Windows, it asks you what type of Windows. You can even do Windows 95. If you're doing Linux, it asks you what type of Linux. And it's important that you select this. Again, ESXi will try to optimize the environment for your operating system to run best. Then it will ask you how many sockets for the CPU. I would say leave it the same. And how many cores. Again, for right now, just leave it at the defaults. This will work fine. Now it's going to ask you how much RAM you want to give to this, this instance, this virtual server. So that hypervisor over there has a total of 4 gigs of RAM on it. In order for the hypervisor to work, it needs about 200 megs of RAM just for the server, and then the rest is left for whatever instances are running on the hypervisor. So figure out of 4 gigs, you have about 3 gigs left. Now be careful. If you over allocate RAM, if you give too much RAM to all of your different instances of operating systems, you can crash the entire server. So just keep this in mind, keep the math in mind. So if you put 3 servers on there, then you can give them each 1 gig of RAM. If you put 4 servers on there, then you can give 2 500 megs of RAM and 2 1 gig of RAM. So that RAM has to match up. If you give too much RAM to your servers, the instances may use up all that RAM and then end up crashing the hypervisor entirely. So just keep that in mind. So you say, how much RAM does this thing need? Basically, give it the least amount possible, but make sure it is still enough that the instance will work properly. Then this is asking you about the network configuration. Again, I would say leave this as default. So this has 1 network card on it. This is the default. The big one here is connect at power on. Make sure this is checked to make sure that the server actually connects to the network when you boot it up. Then it asks you about the SCSI controller. Leave it the default. Do you want to create a new virtual disk? So this is the equivalent of the hard drive. So yes, you do. Then it asks how big do you want this to be? Again, be careful. As I've talked about in the past, the number one thing to make servers crash is not enough hard drive space. People don't make the hard drives big enough. So if you're just creating a little test server, giving it a 16 gig hard drive is a-okay. If you're going to be making a production server, you should give it at least 100 gigs of space. Again, be careful with this resource allocation. If you don't give your systems enough resources, you will end up crashing them. So right now I'll leave it at 16 gigs. I leave all the disk provisioning the same. Again, in another episode we may go into this and I'll talk about it more, but right now we'll just leave it for the default. We hit next. Again, virtual devices and all that, we will leave it the same. We click next, and now we have done everything we need to create this instance of an operating system. So now all we'll do is we'll click finish, and it will create the instance. So now we can see that we have test. So this is an instance, but it does not have an operating system yet. We can look at summary, we can look at resources, but there's no operating system that we can actually use. Now the important, remember in college where your professors used to say, this is important? Well, I'm going to show you probably one of the most important things about installing an operating system into this environment. So it's very, very important that you listen to me. Now, since we've separated out the operating system from the hardware, it gets a little confusing when you actually go to install the operating system, because now the CD-ROM drive on the server is not necessarily the CD-ROM drive you would use, so you have to configure which CD-ROM you'll be booting off of in order to install the operating system. So what I mean by that is when we go back to this hypervisor, what we can do is we can right-click on the instance we want to deal with, and then we want to go down to Edit Settings. Now this is going to show us all the settings that we created before. So memory, and we can change it. So we can say, oh, I want to give it 2 gigs now. CPUs, video cards, SCSI, hard drive, blah, blah, blah. But the important thing is this CD-DVD drive here, right? Because if you don't get this correct, it's just going to be a real pain in the butt to try to install the operating system. So over on the left-hand side here, we have a couple of different options. So we can see this says device type. So for the CD drive, where is the CD drive located? The client device, the host device, or a data store? Well, the issue is when you think of client device, you're thinking of the hypervisor itself. But really, the client device is this server, this system that we're sitting at right now, wherever vSphere is installed. So if you want to use the CD-ROM on the hypervisor, what you need to do is you need to select host device, leave it at the default, and then do connect at power on. Please, 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 please do that. So we do host device and connect at power on. This will connect the virtual server, that instance that you're creating, to the CD-ROM that is sitting on that hypervisor. If you don't do this, it will not be able to boot off of that CD-ROM, and you will not be able to install an operating system. So again, as I said in college, or as I said in high school, when teachers are like, remember this in the test, this is the one that you have to remember for the test. Then once you've done that, all you have to do is you click OK, and you are done. So, as I recall, I already put the operating system disk into the hypervisor. So what I can do is I can highlight test the instance, and I can go to console. Now what I will do is I will click this green button on here for power on. So when I click power on, that is powering on the instance of the operating system. Now, since I connected that to the CD-ROM drive, it can now boot the instance off of the CD-ROM drive, and now, as you can see, it is trying to boot into Ubuntu. It's booting into the installation CD. Now, this is going to truck along for a minute, but basically at the end of it, it is going to give the option to install Ubuntu 10.10 onto that instance. So I'll give it a second to see if it actually does it. But I'm not going to go any further than just to show you where this ends up, because that's really all there is. So basically, remember, you install ESXi onto the hypervisor server. You manage that hypervisor using vSphere to connect to it. You then install instances of operating systems onto the hypervisor. Those are servers so that clients can connect. As far as client computers are concerned, those instances of the servers are just normal regular servers. They do not care that they're virtualized or whether they're normal hardware-based servers. They just see it as a server. So that is really all there is to this. Again, the main thing to remember is what I showed you is you create the instance of the operating system within ESXi, but then you have to connect that instance to the CD-ROM drive. If you do not connect the instance to the CD-ROM drive, you're not going to be able to boot off of the CD-ROM, and then it's all going to be a mess. So if you keep those things in mind, life will go a lot easier. Again, ESXi is free from VMware. vSphere, the basic functioning is free. If you want the more complicated stuff, that does get expensive. You know, you can pay all the way up to $3,000 or $10,000. That's all, you know, whatever you want to do. But again, the basic functionality is there, even if you don't pay anything for it. Again, the reason I used ESXi instead of something like Citrix or some of the other options is because you can pay for support down the road, and because you don't have to deal with the storage pools the way you do with some other hypervisors. So for showing this to you guys right now, this is the simplest. So the little page is shown up, and so here within this instance, it is now allowing me to install Ubuntu. So all I have to do is at this point to install Ubuntu onto this instance is click the install button, and now it will start the installation process. And from here, it is the exact same as if I was installing Ubuntu onto a physical piece of hardware. So that's all there is to it. Again, it may seem like a lot, it may seem really complicated when you're just getting into this, but if you play with this a little bit, you set it up, you'll find out that it's really actually pretty easy. Again, the question is, a lot of people think you have to go out and buy $2,000 and $3,000 and $5,000 servers to do this. All you do is create the ESXi disk, throw it into a crappy computer you have laying around the house, and I'm telling you, you'd be surprised how many times ESXi will work on that crappy computer. Again, that's a 3-year-old computer over there that I bought for $400 3 years ago, laptop. You wouldn't think you could turn that into a Type 1 hypervisor when in fact you can. So yeah. So that was the episode. Again, I did an introduction to Type 1 hypervisors in episode, I think it was 328. So if you need a little bit more overview, you can go there. I will do more episodes in the future about some of the more complicated things you can do with this software, but this basically gives you the idea so that you can start playing with this. Again, when we start dealing with these Type 1 hypervisors, these are pieces of software created by different vendors. So although the different vendor software will work pretty much the same, they will do things differently. So if you see this and you think this is really cool, but you go, Eli, I don't want to use VMware, I want to use XenServer, it all works kind of the same, but a little different, so just keep that in mind. But as we go, I'll do more episodes about how to configure this into more complicated fashions, and I will also show you XenServer. I actually like XenServer better than VMware ESXi. It is simply a little more complicated, and so in the first class of this, I didn't want to get you guys confused. So, as you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy. This was episode 333, Introduction to VMware ESXi Virtualization. I enjoyed taping this episode, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.